Donald Trump today vowed to impose a 200% tariff on John Deere's imports. Just back in June, John Deere announced that they were relocating specific production lines to facilities in Mexico. Now, Donald Trump disagreed with this decision and left a significant threat that would ultimately affect the company's bottom line. "I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States." It did not start with an explosion. There were no riots, no dramatic speeches, no viral sound bites, just a quiet procedural shift, a bureaucratic signature. One line of policy buried in a Canadian regulation manual. But that single decision shattered the backbone of American farming. John Deere, the unshakable symbol of American grit, froze. Not because of war or tariffs, not because of sabotage, but because Canada rewrote the rulebook. And by the time anyone in Washington realized what was happening, it was already too late. Factories across the American Midwest fell silent. Showrooms went dark. And in cornfields and wheat farms from Iowa to Nebraska, farmers waited for parts that would never arrive. This was not an economic downturn. It was an industrial asphyxiation delivered not with bombs, but with paperwork. Before we continue, hit that like button to help us beat the YouTube algorithm and to show your support. Canada never needed to issue threats. They did not have to raise a single fist. Instead, they tightened the logistics chain, adding layers of complexity so dense that even John Deere's decades-old supply pipeline collapsed under its own weight. And while America's green giant stumbled, the wolves pounced. What John Deere could not deliver, they could. Farmers out of options made the switch. John Deere never saw it coming. Neither did Washington, and neither did the small-town Americans, who had trusted Deere with their livelihoods for generations. This is the story of how Canada brought John Deere to its knees, and how the rest of the world used that moment of chaos to redraw the future of agriculture. The first shockwave hit Iowa. Assembly lines sputtered, then went quiet. Workers stood beside silent machines, waiting for shipments that never showed up. Some had been with Deere for over 30 years, but none of them had seen anything like this. Plant after plant shut down. Managers tried to reassure employees, saying it was temporary. But as days turned into weeks, faith gave way to fury. Layoffs began, first in the hundreds, then in the thousands. The calls to headquarters went unanswered. The showrooms, once shrines to American farming pride, were stripped bare. Empty shelves replaced polished metal. The legendary green and yellow now the colors of disappointment. Deere's contingency plans failed instantly. The parts were too specialized. Local suppliers could not replicate them. And Canadian manufacturers, now bound by new export requirements, could not get them across the border in time. By the end of the month, factories began dismantling half-built machines just to free up space. Not even during the pandemic had it gotten this bad. John Deere, the titan of tillers and harvesters, was not just delayed, it was being gutted from within. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button to show your support to the channel. Meanwhile, the pain spread outward to the dealerships in towns where the local Deere dealer was a cornerstone of daily life. Desperation set in. Breaking news. 107-year-old Deere & Company is about, let's call it 32 minutes away from closing at a level never before seen for the farm equipment giant. The stock is up more than 4% at the moment, hitting a record high after reporting fiscal second quarter earnings that beat on both the top and bottom line. One Nebraska dealer said it best: "We have the building, the name, and the uniforms, but we are selling air. It's like running a grocery store with no food." Some dealers, terrified of going under, began quietly stocking competitor brands. Tractors from South Korea, implements from China. It was blasphemy. But they had no choice. Farmers who had bled green for decades started searching for alternatives. It felt like a betrayal, but survival outweighed tradition. And while rural America was cracking under the weight of silence, Canada continued tightening the screws. This was no accident. It was a masterstroke designed to push American companies to bring production back within their own borders or risk watching it die abroad. Canada's move was not just about parts. It was about control, about changing the fundamental calculations inside every American boardroom. Mark Carney, Canada's economic mastermind, had made his move. By choking the supply chain during peak production season, he exposed the United States' most vulnerable dependents and ensured that any company unwilling to localize would be the first to fall. And Deere did fall. But the pain did not end there. It spread. Farmers in the Great Plains started turning to brands they had never considered before: tractors from BYD, harvesters from Fendt, digital interfaces from CLA. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. China and South Korea moved with the speed of predators. BYD and NIO began cutting deals with American dealerships left in the lurch by Deere's collapse. European brands offered generous financing. Some even shipped parts directly to farms, bypassing American infrastructure altogether. As one farmer in Kansas put it, loyalty doesn't put food on the table. Working equipment does. Meanwhile, state governments began to panic. Governors from Iowa, Michigan, and Ohio, states that had voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, found themselves begging Canadian trade officials for mercy. Trump's tariffs had promised to protect American manufacturing. Instead, they left entire regions defenseless. The irony was devastating. With Washington offering no solutions, governors began cutting back channel deals. Some offered tax breaks to foreign manufacturers willing to build inside their states. Others looked to Mexico for new partners. The federal government, still preaching about national strength and economic independence, was being quietly bypassed by its own allies. And as the policy chaos played out, the emotional collapse continued. Cafes closed early. Local banks saw deposit withdrawals. Schools in factory towns began preparing for funding cuts. And the green fields of the Midwest, once dotted with Deere machines, started looking foreign. Rural Americans, who had believed in the promise of protectionism, were now staring down the barrel of economic ruin. Grassroots movements formed. Some farmers launched lawsuits, others organized protests outside state houses. Many simply left, walking away from equipment they could no longer afford to fix or replace. And in boardrooms at John Deere headquarters, the panic finally set in. Executives called emergency meetings, stock values plummeted, investors fled. The company scrambled to retrofit plants in Iowa and Illinois, desperate to restart domestic production. But it was too late. Parts suppliers had moved on. Former partners were hesitant to return. Workers rehired after months of silence found themselves assembling machines with outdated tech. It was not a comeback. It was a collapse in slow motion. Even foreign automakers began to take notice. In Japan, trade ministers huddled with executives from Toyota and Honda. Their conclusion: the American market was no longer a reliable partner. Tariffs had made it too volatile. In response, Japan pivoted. Toyota doubled down on its Kentucky plant. Honda announced a new electric vehicle facility in Ohio, and behind closed doors, officials began preparing to expand exports to Europe and Southeast Asia, slowly decoupling from the United States. But while Japan strategized, China and South Korea acted. NIO opened new offices in California. BYD inked deals in Texas. Hyundai accelerated its electric vehicle rollout from Alabama and Georgia, quietly cornering the market that John Deere had once symbolized. American consumers, fed up with inflated prices and broken promises, started embracing foreign options with open arms. And Europe hesitated, trapped between its luxury identity and a brutal new reality. Mercedes and BMW could not absorb the tariff costs, but moving production to the United States would dilute their brand. So they stalled, hemorrhaging market share to Asian giants. By the time they adapted, it might be too late. And through it all, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was not just about parts, it was about power. Canada had fired the first shot, and it landed like a missile. The tariffs had not protected American manufacturing, they had exposed it. Now companies like Deere are racing against time, desperately trying to rebuild what was lost. Not just supply chains, but trust. Whether they succeed remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the world has changed. And the next chapter of American industry will not be written in boardrooms. It will be written in the factories that stayed silent too long.